Nature is a source of infinite creativity, and cannabinoids are one of its most amazing gifts. Today, thanks to one of nature's oldest processes, fermentation, Creo is unleashing the full potential of cannabinoids, transforming health, wellness, and nutrition, using technology that delivers innovation without doing undue harm to the planet. Join Creo in bringing cannabinoid-enabled products to every household. Nature loves our cannabinoids, and so will you.
Hello everyone, my name is Sally Dominguez and I want to welcome you to the first annual Creovate conference. There has never been a time in our lives when we were more conscious about the products we choose for our wellness and beauty, what we eat, what we drink, what we put on our skin. Our host, Creo, has assembled some of the foremost thought leaders about the future of product development, particularly when it comes to functional cannabinoids well beyond CBD. Creo's innovation is making it possible to produce these ingredients to commercial scale in their most pure and clean form. Just last week, Creo announced skincare collaborations with Fifth and Root, who are using Creo CBG to introduce a spot treatment for blemishes, and with Joya, who are launching 3 Creo CBG products, including an age-defying serum, a calming serum, and an anti-blemish oil. I am so excited to host our experts as they guide you through the possibilities of pure by fermentation, CBG, and other cannabinoids. Now, you hear a lot of new and useful information around cannabinoids and their uses, so please post your questions as you think of them in the box at the bottom labeled Q&A, and we'll ask the panelists after their roundtable. We may run 10 minutes over, so if you have a hard stop, please know that any questions not answered by the panel will be answered by email. Now let's meet our panel of experts. Roy Lipski is the co-founder and CEO of Creo. A biochemist by education, Roy's career has been at the interface of science and business, turning world-class science into real-world products and companies. He was previously the CEO of a public company for close to 10 years. Dr. Liliana George is a visionary in the science of beauty and currently leads Pure Beauty Cosmetics, a consulting firm she created in 2016, which works with startups on concept development and product innovation. With over 20 years of experience in the cosmetics industry, including 17 years at the Estee Lauder companies, Liliana has been heard to describe Creo as the most exciting technology she's seen in the last 5 years. Mia Davis is the VP of Sustainability and Impact at Creo Beauty. From packaging to the ingredients themselves, Mia is an expert on clean and sustainable beauty. Mitch Hara has 30 years of experience operating in disruptive categories, including cannabis, retail, and e-commerce. Mitch was head of M&A and business development for Clever Leaves, one of the largest vertically integrated cannabis producers in the Western Hemisphere, and he's consulted for cannabis brands Canuka and Dr. Kirkland Therapeutics. Dr. Jessica Peatross is one of the most sought-after functional medicine leaders and visionaries for the future of healthcare. And her online platform, Wellness Plus by Dr. Jess, is pioneering accessible medical information on cannabinoid healing. Bethany Gomez manages Brightfield Group, a leading consumer insights and market intelligence firm for the CBD and cannabis industries. Her background in quantitative research, global policy and strategic planning has made her a key driver of business development, managing some of Brightfield's top clients. And now our first question for Roy, our CEO. Roy, how does CBG differ from CBD?
So CBD and CBG are different cannabinoids, but CBG, or rather CBGA, is the mother cannabinoid from which every other cannabinoid is made in the plant. So in the plant, CBGA, which is the acid form of the cannabinoid, is made first. And then from that, it's derivatized into CBD, THC, CBC, etc. Now, the important thing to remember is that within the plant, most of the CBGA is converted into other cannabinoids. And so there's very little of it left. When cannabinoids are heated or exposed to the environment, they turn into the neutral form. They lose that acid form and become CBG, becomes CBG, CBGA becomes CBG, CBDA becomes CBD. Now, not only is CBGA rare, and therefore CBG is rare, but generally speaking, the acid forms are rarer than the non-acid forms because they're harder to extract from the plant. So we got CBGA, the mother cannabinoid, CBG, the neutral form of CBGA, which is sometimes known as the skin cannabinoid because it has a lot of important characteristics for skin care. Now, CBD and CBG do a lot of similar things, although they may do so in slightly different cellular mechanisms. So, for example, both of them are, work well for immune response, pain. They're both potent antibacterial agents, potent antioxidants as well. But CBG kind of stands out from CBD when it comes to inflammation. It's better at controlling and reducing inflammation. It's better at reducing flaking of the skin, and is also believed to be very powerful at reducing and preventing acne, for example. There's one thing, though, that CBG is unique amongst all of the cannabinoids. Amongst all of the cannabinoids tested to date, CBG is the only one that actually stimulates the body's natural production of sebum. Sebum is the moisturizing component in skin. And whereas a lot of the other cannabinoids, including CBD, actually reduce sebum production, so they dry the skin, CBG actually stimulates its production, so it helps to moisturize the skin. One last thing I'd like to say in terms of the acid and the non-acid forms. The acid form, whilst it's rarer and harder to extract from the plant, is actually believed to, there's some work that's been done to show this, to be better absorbed and retained by the body. And so there may be advantages to actually working with the acid form as well.
Really interesting. And we have Dr. Liliana, who can also speak to CBG as the skin cannabinoid. So as Roy's mentioned, CBG has beneficial properties that other cannabinoids like CBD don't have. Liliana, could this be the next star active ingredient in cosmetics?
Well, this is a very good question and a very challenging question at the same time. So I like the fact that CBG is called the skin cannabinoid. And I understand from what I've read so far and from my discussions with Roy and the team that there is a lot of data to suggest that besides being an antioxidant and an antimicrobial, it has a number of properties that are significant for skincare applications. As Roy mentioned, there is some data that suggests that it would be a moisturizer, and that is because it enforces the barrier function. Also, there is data that shows that it has anti-inflammatory properties, which are very important for the skin, from calming to redness reduction. Then the data that shows anti-acne properties, And all these together are very important to find in one biological active, in one ingredient. Because, there is one trend these days for products that are multitasking, multifunctional products. So in order to achieve such performance, one has to formulate with many active ingredients, right? In this particular case, CBG proves to have all these benefits. It can become a star ingredient for this particular trend. But what is more interesting to me, and I keep thinking about this because I think it's very important for the future. The fact that the process that Creo, the fermentation process that Creo has in place, can create CBGA is very important, because CBGA can become the building block for synthesizing further actives, new cannabinoids. So that would be very important for the cosmetic industry to have, it goes back to 40 years ago when Dr. Klickman found retinoic acid and then retinoids. These days, we are still using these ingredients. These are star ingredients. They are not old ingredients. Star ingredients, they live forever, they pass the test of time. So I think between CBG and CBGA and all the properties that we discussed, there is huge potential.
Fantastic. Thank you. Mia, now you're a leader in understanding and promoting specifically clean beauty. So how do you define clean and sustainable ingredients?
Yeah, so I think of sustainable as core to the definition of clean, actually. I really see clean as the nexus of a few different things: sustainability, safety, sourcing, ethics, and it all has to be held within a through line of transparency, because if we don't have greater transparency about all these things, how can we really back them up or define clean in a meaningful way? So sustainability to me doesn't live outside of clean. It's really part and part of how I envision clean and clean beauty. That isn't to say that every single ingredient or every single product that is clean is hitting it out of the park on all of its criteria, but it's both the definition, I think, and a vision of clean for me. Sustainability is really important to clean because if we aren't sourcing ingredients and making products that take into account the effect on the environment at the beginning of the supply chain when they're created, as well as the user experience, everything that's happening through the life of the product. And then at the end, whenever it's disposed of, is it washed down the drain? Is it in an incinerator? Is it in a landfill? What is happening? All of these things impact the sustainability of an ingredient or a product. So it's really core to clean for me.
Bethany, you've tracked the explosive growth of CBD as a functional ingredient. Do you believe CPG will follow a similar trajectory?
So really understanding that CBG and branding to consumers that CBG is the skin cannabinoid is really a great way of being able to really be able to make that known with consumers, find that positioning, find that niche, and be able to really grow and expand the industry from there. So that's something I think is really important and something that would really benefit from. When we really look at the CBG consumers today, in a recent survey of more than 5,000 CBD users, we found that more than 17.5% were aware of CBG, and those that were aware of CBG were nearly 8 in 10 wanted to go on and purchase. Those that were currently purchasing were heavily over-indexing on using for skincare and beauty purposes. At more than double the rate of CBD users today. So there's a real opportunity for CBG as a cannabinoid to really take over a greater and greater share, particularly of the skincare and topicals market, which is currently sitting at $700 million in the CBD space today, and is expected to hit $1.9 billion by 2025. So there's a really strong opportunity for CBG to take over more and more of that CBD industry's topical share in particular. But again, the biggest lesson learned, I think, should be really being able to put the consumer first and really make sure that message is communicated to the consumer properly, which is a challenge in the current environment.
It's really interesting.
Might I add to that?
Sorry. Yes, Dr. Jess.
So I really appreciate what you said, Bethany. As a physician, I think it's so important for what we're doing here as education to the public as well, right? And
Absolutely.
even for healthcare providers like me, a lot of the docs don't understand the benefits of these specific cannabinoids. And so educating them and getting the word out to healthcare providers is going to get a lot of bang for your buck too.
Absolutely, 100%. You know, these industries start to grow up via word of mouth advertising, which is great when people find something that works for them when nothing else has. They want to scream it from the rooftops, but screaming it from the rooftops from another user is not necessarily the same as hearing it from your doctor. And you know, with physicians, there's a lot of education that needs to be done for physicians who want to be able to, you know, recommend great solutions for to their patients, but need the, you know, the requisite data to be able to do that in an educated fashion. So really key to unlocking additional growth there.
It's a really interesting point because, you know, we hear time and time again that education is the key for growth and the bringing of this ingredient into the mainstream. But if you're talking about millennials, but even more so Gen Z, very hard to communicate to people who are already walling themselves off from kind of public access. So going through the doctor is kind of the logical way, I think. Mitch.
Given your experience in CPG, what do you think needs to happen in order for cannabinoids to reach mainstream ingredient status?
Look, I would say that, you know, cannabinoids led primarily by CBD are gaining mainstream status every day, right? But there's still a long way to go before consumers understand the benefits of CBD, CBG, et cetera, in terms of the whole host of cannabinoids. I would say for, you know, cannabinoids to really gain mainstream status or mainstream ingredient status, you know, 4 things really need to happen. There needs to be trust and credibility developed and shared between 4 communities: consumer, medical, regulatory, and big business or big pharma. And when the stars align between these 4 communities, then I think you'll see more general acceptance and more mainstream ingredient status for cannabinoids across the board, you know, CBG included.
Right. Dr. Jess. Oh, sorry.
Add something?
Yes.
Yeah, so actually a very broad picture was just drawn for the audience to understand how big the space is and how many questions are still to be answered. But particularly in the CBG, particularly on the CBG topic, I would like to say that before we declare a clear potential for a star ingredient, we have to make sure that we have a safety and the performance testing in place.
Absolutely. Thank you. So Dr. Jess is working right in this area and pioneering some of the medical benefits of various cannabinoids. So Dr. Jess, given your success in this area already, what do you believe is the potential for CBG alone or with other cannabinoids in treating medical conditions?
Great question. So cannabigerol or CBG is a non-psychoactive minor cannabinoid, right? That comes from this plant. I'm really excited about CBG, just like I know everyone else on this panel is. The studies coming out that are published are really groundbreaking. And I'm really excited for a lot of the healthcare professionals to start paying attention to these studies because they really are groundbreaking and mind-blowing if you're paying attention. CBG has the potential, and it's been mentioned a bunch here with some of the benefits, obviously. It's extremely antibacterial. It's also antifungal. It breaks through bacterial biofilms. That means it's literally pond scum, the sticky stuff you wake up on your teeth. It breaks through that. It's amazing. That's how bacteria and pathogens hide on the skin as well. It helps with xerosis, dry skin, aging, because it's able to create lipid production in the skin and sebum production. That's amazing characteristic of CBG. You guys should see the studies about the GI inflammation and the way it helps treat inflammatory bowel disease, the Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. The studies are out there. Moreover, what I'm really excited for one of my personal patients is the studies behind the neuroprotective effects and the studies on neurodegeneration and neuroinflammation that CBG is protective against. For example, I have a severe 32-year-old ALS patient, Lou Gehrig's disease. He's in a wheelchair and he doesn't speak. And CBG oil, a tincture, is something that I give him for focus, for anti-spasticity, for neuroinflammation, which is the problem with these neurodegenerative conditions. CBG is on the brink of what I think could be many medical breakthroughs. And when we get the healthcare practitioners on board and they see the research and they see the anecdotal studies, it's really going to be an explosion within the health and the medical industry, in my opinion.
Fantastic.
May I just add to that, please? So, look, Mitch, Dr. Jess, really good points. We all agree that, you know, the science needs to catch up, and it's doing so. And in part, it's because, you know, these amazing compounds have been put off limits for a long time because of a sort of quirk of legal history. But what we have to remember is the reason why CBD and now increasingly other cannabinoids are really catching on is because they work. Now, the science has to catch up and explain why they work and in what ways they work, but they actually work. And the reason why so many people are using it is because of word of mouth and personal experience. These compounds actually do work. I mean, I've come across so many people, I'm sure you do, Dr. Jess, in your practice, of how these ingredients have really transformed their lives, ailments that nothing else was helping. So let's not kind of put that, let's not diminish that just because the science has not yet caught up.
Absolutely not. In fact, in my career, I stepped outside the box of what conventional medical doctors would do and started giving CBD and cannabis cards to patients who needed it. And what I saw as anecdotal studies was enough for me to change my whole career, because I saw patients get off 30 different medications. I saw people quit seizing and track and stare at their mother for the first time in their life right in front of me. And that right there is enough for me. I'm just waiting on the science.
Mia, can you provide some examples of ingredients that are produced by fermentation in the same way as Creo?
Yeah, I think fermentation lends itself really well to this growing clean or natural or more sustainable segment of the beauty industry, which I think we can agree is not a trend. It's here to stay. We're seeing explosive growth and have for about 15 years. I think that some of the ingredients that people might be surprised that can be fermented, that you might find in some of your favorite skincare ingredients, include some of the AHAs and hyaluronic acid. They used to come from rooster combs. It's present in our bodies, and it's considered, and I'm sure Dr. Jess would be great at adding why it's so important to skin and joints. But HA, we make it in our own bodies. It's really important to healthy skin, that dewy, like youthful look that folks are going for, but we make less of it over time. So people started adding it to skincare. And a lot of the HA that you find in skincare now comes from a fermentation process. There's also, this is really innovative and cool, there are a few new preservative systems that are fermented. Preservatives are particularly challenging in the beauty industry, in all consumer packaged goods, really, because we're seeking, non-toxic, safer, more sustainable materials, but preservatives are inherently toxic because they kill yeast and bacteria and mold, and they're also really necessary if you're going to stick a product on a shelf for a long time and have it in a nice warm bathroom with other delicious sugars in the product that will grow things. But we've seen the industry moving away from a lot of preservatives, right, wrong, or indifferent about those, and more consumer demand for safer and more natural preservative systems. So there's some cool new preservative systems that won't work for every product, but are showing better safety profiles that are fermented, including like from radish root, for example.
Mitch, what's the importance of the cannabinoid supply chain for brands, and how might fermentation help?
So look, I think there are many ways that fermented cannabinoids can play a role in brand and company strategy. Obviously, from a supply chain perspective, from a standpoint of sustainability and reliability, whether a brand is launching or already established, having access to a reliable, sustainable supply chain is paramount to doing business. It's the lifeblood of the business, obviously, and fermented cannabinoids can offer that. There is no national or super regional infrastructure or supply chain in the U.S., which makes it difficult for brands of all sizes to ultimately source sustainable long-term supplies. And so what that results in generally fragmented supply chains, whether you're a big or small brand, and sometimes not knowing whether your shipments are going to be on time or of a certain quality so that you can get your products on the shelves. Then from a quality, consistency, and cost effectiveness standpoint, obviously more critical for large scale producers and ultimately for big CPG and big pharma when that occurs. These cannabinoids can be produced more economically, more easily, and at scale. And most importantly, allowing for much more in the way of control and consistency over those cannabinoids, which again, more important the larger scale producer you are. And so uncontrolled growing conditions, outdoor and to a certain extent indoor, become problematic in terms of consistency, in terms of from commodity standpoint, et cetera. And another benefit is producers, manufacturers tend to stand out, from a quality standpoint by making sure they have their COAs, making sure their products are traceable. You may or may not have to do that with respect to fermented cannabinoids.
Traceability is much, much easier.
Much easier. Right.
And if I may add to that too, just from a medical standpoint, when you think about how you're getting CBG, CBD, otherwise from the hemp plant, the industrial hemp plant, which bioaccumulates. So what does it do? It pulls up things from our strip soil or our diseased soil, heavy metals, right? That's very dangerous for people. Anything, pesticides, herbicides, mold growth, all these things are not mitigated when you're used to the wild of growing a hemp out in the environment as well.
Right, and there's a couple of other aspects, very important point, a couple of other aspects, right? From a regulatory and compliance standpoint, and we've mentioned this before, fermented cannabinoids are THC free, right? So technically exempt from FDA regulations, which would give manufacturers, producers the opportunity to operate, produce, sell more freely within and among the 50 states, and certainly in some international geographies where non-plant derived cannabinoids are more in favor. And again, we said it before, unlike CBD, CBG is not considered a drug, by the FDA. And then lastly, but not leastly, is the ESG perspective, right? Relative to, production of plant-based cannabinoids, fermented cannabinoids, tend to have less to little impact on the environment from both a physical and financial standpoint vis-a-vis, plant grown. ESG is obviously becoming more and more important with respect to consumer preferences across the board, and is more and more permeating the corporate ethos and supply chains across the board as well. And so that's another factor to take into account. But in all cases, a fermented supply chain can supplement, can serve as a natural hedge, to any business strategy. Then again, there'll always be, smaller to mid-sized brands whose business strategy is really only focused on plant-based or natural, cannabinoids, if you will, and they'll continue to produce those for those customers that demand them.
Well, I'd like to add to that, if I may. So, this is part of a bigger trend. We are living in the century of biology. The last century was a century of physics and technology. This is the century of biology, and biomanufacturing, fermentation is effectively the manufacturing arm of this biology revolution that's taking place right now. And I honestly believe this is one of the key weapons that we have today to address the major environmental challenges that the world is facing. So within that kind of context, moving fermentation to the context of cannabinoids, as you said, Mitch, lots of supply chain issues, purity, consistency, safety, reliability, scalability, price stability, all things that are really important if you're looking to build a brand based on these ingredients. Legal simplicity, because it doesn't come from the cannabis plant, you kind of sidestep the whole DEA and narcotics issue. There's no THC. You can make rarer cannabinoids like CBG, CBC much more easily than you can extracting from the plant. The environmental issues, less water, land, electricity. I've seen data that shows that producing cannabinoids using fermentation for the same amount of land, you can make 7 times more than by growing hemp, for example. And then finally, this is an important distinction. Because you're making these compounds using biology, they meet a lot of the definition of natural. So for example, the cosmetics ingredient natural definition, ISO definition, these compounds meet that. And also they're GMO free because, you know, there's no DNA, there's no organism. There's a lot that can be talked about the GM thing, but to summarize, they're essentially GMO free. There are no DNA, no organisms in the final compound. So natural, GMO free, and more respectful for the environment.
Bethany, you've seen the growth of many different brands in CBD. What do you think are the first mover advantages on CBG?
Well, we saw with CBD, this market is very crowded at this point. There's more than 3,000 brands by the end of the beginning of 2020 that were operating in the CBD space, so that everybody had kind of just flocked into the space, and we're all competing with very similar positionings. By being the first mover in CBG, being one of the first pioneers in CBG, it really gives brands the opportunity to kind of help to craft that positioning and craft kind of that narrative, craft the, you know, the product, and really have that opportunity to help build the industry up and build the category. And CBG is something I always like to, the way that I look at this is that this industry is, this segment is really waiting for somebody to be able to come in and move it, right? Move the category. If big companies, if companies come in and brands can come in and really do this well, build formulations the right way, build brands, connect and resonate with consumers, it will build the category in a way that otherwise would grow much differently, right? It can grow up the way that CBD has, with many, many small brands all kind of throwing out products and consumers kind of choosing between those and letting the consumers kind of decide and, the consumers grow it. Or if you come in from the beginning, you have that ability to kind of build the category and build it in your image. And that's really where I think there's a great deal of opportunity for people to be able to come in at the beginning with a strategy, with kind of the and strong formulation, strong brand positioning, understanding how it can resonate with consumers and really scale, because there's already a lot more awareness around cannabinoids and a lot more openness to cannabinoids than there was several years back when CBD first hit. There's a lot more openness to this on the part of retailers, on the part of consumers, on the part of physicians, now that their minds have been open. So it's really kind of primed for for companies to be able to come in and really make their mark early on and blow this out of the water, which can really accelerate the growth of the industry.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. If we think about this need to educate and educate with science behind it. And at the same time, we have a fairly robust international discussion on GMO. And Roy, you referenced it and said that the Creo product is GMO free. What would you say to those who have an aversion to GMO?
Yes, so this GMO question is really important to talk about. I have a lot of personal experience in the debate around GMO. One of my first businesses was involved in really monitoring and understanding public opinion in Europe around genetically modified organisms. A lot of this started really as a strong reaction to Monsanto crops that were being grown in the open air. And so the kind of, if we unpack this, the concerns and the fears around GMOs, genetically modified organisms, is that they might go wild in the environment and spread. And number two, the concern that their effects on our body are unknown because we're now introducing new organisms, new DNA combinations into our food or putting on our skin, etc. Now, those are valid concerns, I believe. But what we have to understand is that, fermentation is quite different to this. In fermentation, you're using microbes that have been bred or otherwise evolved to do something particular. But number one, these organisms, these microbes are harmless. They wouldn't cause any damage if a person was exposed to them, although people are never going to be exposed to them. They can't go run wild in their environment because they've been bred to exist in such a very controlled environment that they're useless out in the wild. Their natural cousins would totally outcompete them. And then the final point, which I kind of alluded to earlier, unlike the concerns with GM crops, you're not eating the microbes. You're not being exposed to them. There's none of the DNA that ever touches you as the product. So it's quite a different paradigm. I kind of call this what's happening with fermentation, the last great domestication. You know, we domesticated crops, we domesticated animals. We're now domesticating microbes and using them to produce a lot of the organic compounds that we as a society and as human beings rely on and need. And so it's important to understand that this is quite different and quite removed from a lot of the concerns that people originally had around genetically modified organisms.
Mia, how do you feel about that? As clean, I've heard you speak on GMO. Do you feel like that response classifies into clean as it currently stands?
Yeah, I certainly agree with everything that Roy just said. I'm not going to go out and say like across the board all the time fermentation is clean or better. It's always case by case, and that's really the holistic definition and vision that I am embracing around clean. Is that whether you're talking about an ingredient, a full product, a package, a process, we really need to look at the different parameters around safety and sourcing and sustainability and take those all into account for each thing we're talking about, right? You can, I'm sure that you can come up with a fermentation process that is incredibly unsustainable, might not be nearly as pure and clean as what we're talking about with Creo. But I think overall, fermentation is very promising for all the reasons we've just discussed. And even to take it outside of cannabinoids for a moment, there's a company that I know of that I'm really impressed with called C16 Bio, and their mission is to stop deforestation. So they are working to ferment in the lab using oily yeast, palm oil. So palm oil right now is incredibly common ingredient in packaged foods and in beauty and in basically anything that you can put in a package. There's probably palm oil or palm derived ingredient in there, but palm oil is very land intensive, very negative climate effects, massive habitat destruction, major ethical issues around who is growing and harvesting and how they're being treated, paid or not paid, all of that. So palm oil, you know, inherently it's natural and it could be sustainable, but the way human beings are doing it is a big old mess. So instead of rejecting palm oil or saying that ingredient is bad, saying, is there a better way that we can do this that is inherently more ethical, more sustainable, and I would argue cleaner, right? And they are doing some really cool work. So I think that Roy is right also in that we're going to be seeing more of this, not just with, you know, CBG, which is really exciting.
That's so true. Such a great analogy using palm oil. So we're about to jump to live questions, and we have many of them from our audience. But before we do, I have a final question for Liliana. As the scientist behind so many cosmetic breakthroughs and with so much cosmetic knowledge, where do you see CBG leading us in terms of innovation in cosmetics?
So first of all, I have to say that the conversation was very interesting because it was touching on several topics that were hot in the industry for over 10 years. And to me, the fact that Creo has a proprietary position in this fermentation process is very important. And I would even push the envelope further and say that this fermentation process really qualifies to a sustainable green chemistry type of process. The industry has been talking about sourcing for a long time, and obviously sourcing is extremely important, but its sustainability to me, it's a circle. It's from inception of an ingredient or product to end user and beyond. So this type of fermentation is really extremely important for the production of CBG. When it comes to innovation, I think of innovation going hand in hand with performance. So the consumer gets very excited about the story. They will buy a product, But ultimately, the test is when they go back and they buy the product again. So if the performance will be there and CBG will be the reason why the product will perform, that will be the success story for me.
Thank you. And just on a clarification on actually what fermentation of cannabinoids even means. In a step-by-step, Roy, can you walk us through that process as it pertains to what Creo is creating?
Sure. So it all starts with a proprietary microbe. In our case, we're using a bacterium that has been evolved to produce cannabinoids, which is obviously something it doesn't naturally do. What you do is you place this special microbe essentially in a fermentation vat. This is the best way to describe it. Is it's a high-tech brewery. It's a big container. You feed it sugar. You keep the right sort of temperature and air conditions, and it grows. And as it grows, as part of its normal life cycle, it now produces CBGA, the mother cannabinoid. Then at the end of the fermentation, which typically takes no more than 2 or 3 days, you now have a brew, which is like a beer, but instead of having alcohol in it, it's got the cannabinoid in it, which you then separate and purify. And because everything that goes into this process is controlled, you know what the microbe is, you know where the sugar comes from, you've got pure water, etc. It's much easier to maintain purity, consistency, etc. Very important characteristics. And because the fermentation cycle is so short, 2 to 3 days, you can produce a lot reliably, consistently, rather than having to, depend on annual harvesting cycles, etc.
That is
Fantastic.
so cool.
Clarity. Thank you. Yes, right?
It is so cool. I mean, it's like a CBD kombucha, only even better. And you guys are amazing. I love it. I mean, I wish all doctors knew about this.
I love it. It's the CBD kombucha where you've washed off everything that isn't just the CBD, right?
And actually, on the subject of CBD, that reminds me. So well, we have to remember that there's over 100 different cannabinoids that have been identified in nature. And to date, we've really only been focused on 2, THC and CBD, because those are 2 that are made in any appreciable amounts in the plant. But I compare this to, we're seeing the world in black and white, whereas there's this whole spectrum of color out there, which are the other cannabinoids. And what we have to stop doing, which I think has been happening, is we're trying to shoehorn everything into 2 cannabinoids. We're using a hammer, so to speak, for every single job. Whereas, some of these other cannabinoids, as we discussed today, may be better than CBD or THC for some particular ailment or benefit. And so by opening the palate to all these other rarer cannabinoids, as can be done with fermentation, I think we're ultimately going to end up with what Liliana was talking about, which is truly effective products for particular uses. So I'm very excited to see how this is going to be developing over the years to come.
Indeed. And clearly the audience is, because there are many questions coming in. So thanks, panel. We've learned a lot. Let's move to the live questions.
Excellent chat. Now, quick note, Mia can't be with us for the Q&A, but if you have questions for Mia, please keep putting them in the chat because she will answer by email. And as we move to the questions, I have a little extra for you all. Creo will be sending everyone watching our new anti-plaque toothpaste created specially by German scientist Dr. Veronika Stahl using pure Creo CBG. So as always, if you want more information on that toothpaste or anything else on this broadcast, please write to info@creoingredients.com. And now the live questions. Liliana, this first question is for you. So you've got the FDA, the DEA, and the states all regulating this in different ways. How do cannabinoids from fermentation support compliance with any or all of these regulation and enforcement agencies?
Yeah, so Let me preface my answer by saying that I'm not a person specializing in regulatory affairs, but clearly we need to state that we don't start, the fermentation that Creo has in place does not start from hemp, does not start from marijuana. Very important. Number two, the product, the CBG is free of THC. So that's also extremely important. And then we are talking about the purity of the ingredients. So all these together, I think are very important attributes that help navigate the regulatory landscape.
Great. This is a question for Dr. Jess. Dr. Jess, there are several tests to prove that a natural cannabinoid does not have THC, pesticides, or heavy metals in the product. In this question asked this experience, it's a matter of QA and sourcing correctly. So the question is, what real additional benefits does this product have versus natural cannabinoids?
Great question. So you have to think about, what we experience out in nature with our world. And unfortunately, because things like pesticides, heavy metals, other things are actually accumulated from the soil into the hemp plant, it's very hard to regulate this with different tests that are costly and actually timely as well for different companies. So when you're taking and you're getting the cannabinoids from a microbe or a bacterium, this eliminates the process of other types of problems within the process of reporting, like as far as toxins go. And so we are actually kind of regulating that on our own through Creo.
Interesting. I have a question for Roy. Roy, have there been clinical studies done on the efficacy of CBD or CBG with regards to all the claims that are being made, or is the info strictly anecdotal?
Sorry, I wasn't mute there. It's kind of in between. So the clinical tests are coming. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence, and there's a significant and growing body of primary research. These are peer-reviewed papers looking either in vitro or in animal models on how these ingredients perform.
Okay. A question for Bethany. Bethany, how do we collectively educate the consumer and at the same time influence regulatory agencies to create sensible rules? And perhaps you might add to that, what do you think might be some sensible rules?
Well, that's a big question, to be sure. So certainly the regulatory bodies are looking into this, but I will say the FDA in particular has a lot on their hands to be able to really wrap their heads around minor cannabinoids and what they're really looking for. I can speak to what they're looking for from a CBD standpoint, because this is currently a regulatory process or review that they're going through right now. And what the agency is really looking for is essentially, are there challenges or are there problems that consumers will face if they ingest large dosages of these cannabinoids? Are there things like liver toxicity or challenges with other counterindications with medication, things like that are going to impact consumers if they use at a high dosage level? They really need to be able to give guidance on what is a safe dosage, what should you not take with these products, how much you can consume and still be safe. That being said, they're in a bit of a pickle right now because these products are already widely distributed around the country. With CBD products, 8% of Americans are using these already, on an ongoing, consistent basis. 1% of Americans are already using CBG products. So they're still a little bit behind, the curve when it comes to a regulatory standpoint, but this safety testing safety protocols are really important for regulatory bodies. And the more that brands and companies like Creo can continue to participate and provide this safety data and any time series of data on consumers and how these products continue to impact the consumers and be safe, will go a long way in continuing to grow that body of data and continue to influence those regulatory bodies. I will say that the agency certainly understand that there is that consumers are using these products, that they certainly want these products as well. And the consumer data, from when we look at consumers, they're using the data. We talk about anecdotal evidence, but we're serving more than 5,000 users every quarter, and we can see those consumers are overwhelmingly satisfied with these products they're consuming. They are not encountering adverse effects at any kind of sizable level. They are finding these products to be very effective and really effective for use cases or conditions that nothing else works for. So I think we at Brightfield, we're really focused in on consumer insights work and what the feedback of the consumer is, which is kind of in between this anecdotal evidence, which is be a handful of cases here and there, and kind of true clinical double-blinded clinical research. But what we're finding from the masses is that consumers are overwhelmingly satisfied, and that these products are generally not creating significant safety issues. And to answer your first question around how can we educate consumers, this is a really big challenge for brands or for companies operating in the space, because there isn't the clinical research, the clinical published studies to allow them to make claims. It's really difficult to communicate to consumers what these products actually do, right? This consumer education about the fermentation process, about, the cannabinoids is really important. It's important to be able to educate, prior to the pandemic, a lot of this education had been done at the point of sale in terms of, store clerks, at CBD specialty stores or dispensaries or, other retailers being able to help speak to people and really communicate what these cannabinoids can do and give recommendations and advice. This is still a remaining challenge. One thing that has worked very effectively in the CBD space is many companies have included additional functional ingredients that really amplify the power of those cannabinoids within the products. While also being able to include those additional health claims on the product. So, a CBD product that all has CBD, CBN, and melatonin, for example, you can position that as a sleep product, and that message comes through to consumers. They can understand what this product is supposed to do for them while having those amplified benefits from multiple sources. So I think there's a great deal of opportunity for this, and CBG really needs some good branding, right? Some really good branding and some really good messaging to really connect with consumers and teach them about what these products do and how they can expect this to be different from CBD, which has the reputation of being very widely useful for a variety of areas. But as we discussed in this panel, the benefits for CBG are much more specific and targeted for many key areas or many key afflictions, and have those very specific use cases that are common amongst many Americans.
Such a good point to allow the supplementary active ingredients to kind of help spell the message out about the CBG. I love that. And also makes a lot of sense to bring all those active ingredients in together. Thanks so much for that, Bethany. We've got a question for Dr. Jess. Dr. Jess, what do you think will be the next cannabinoid beyond CBD, and why do you think that's so?
I would be remiss if I didn't say that it would be CBG, the mother of all cannabinoids. I mean, if you guys listen to this talk we had, you've seen the benefits. I kind of ran through them quickly, but it's just remarkable. Anecdotal studies and the studies that are coming out about the powers of CBG and how it's targeted in skin, dryness of skin, anti-aging in skin, neuroinflammation. That inflammation, it's the powerhouse as far as neuroinflammation goes as well. antibacterial, antifungal, antiviral. So a plethora, a myriad of different effects from the mother cannabinoid, if you will, which I think is going to be the next big thing, CBG.
Good answer.
Yes.
We've got a question for Liliana. Liliana, do you have any recommendations for those formulating with CBG? The percentage of use or any other tips? And the person asking the question says, whatever you can offer would be amazing.
Well, since I have not formulated with CBG, I cannot really give this kind of tips. But what I can say is that I think we reached the point where biotech beauty is helping the cosmetic industry make products that can really be described as green and sustainable. And, you know, for many years, I had the privilege to participate at conferences that were trying to cast the future of green beauty. And what we were missing were a number of ingredients and biological actors that would really help the industry to achieve the goal. And I think that the biotech ingredients that are obtained by processes like the process that Creo has in place are actually going to revolutionize the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been reading a lot lately in VC and investment manuals about how biomanufacturing is the next massive explosion. And here we are talking about the very pointy bleeding edge. Mitch, I've got a question for you. It sounds like there's a huge opportunity to debunk industry myths and educate the community through retail. Beyond the explosion of marijuana dispensaries, are there any brands innovating to craft a well-focused, sustainable cannabinoid experience in your experience?
Yeah, there are some. I don't want to, think that's an advertisement for any, but like you see in general for beauty brands, if you go into your department stores or your specialty retailers, a number of them have hire professionals in addition to folks from their own staff to train and educate consumers in terms of their products and the benefits of that as well. So you're starting to see more and more of that. Some of the most successful brands that I know, and by the way, CBD with respect to skincare, et cetera, a lot of it is sold online, about 70%. And so there's a fair amount of education that takes place online through social media, through their own websites. And there are some who've actually gone a little bit further and have call-in options so that you can speak to educated staff, and in some cases medical staff, to try and better understand the benefits of the products that they're selling. And those who subscribe to that kind of model in terms of direct-to-consumer education are doing a lot better than those who are just tending to rely on retailers and others to do their education for them.
Thanks, Mitch. Roy, because CBG is a mother cannabinoid, does that mean that Creo can create all of the other cannabinoids, all of them, from your technology?
Thank you, Sally. Listen, before I answer that question, I just wanted to add a little bit on the earlier question about formulation. I think for the person who asked that question, I think a safe bet is to start with about 2 to 3% CBG by weight if we're looking at a sort of a topical type application. That's a good place, a safe place to start that will also hopefully also show efficacy. Coming back to your question, yes, absolutely. CBGA, in its acid form, is the mother cannabinoid from which pretty much all other cannabinoids are made. This is precisely the point of our platform. By focusing initially on making the mother cannabinoid, we can then further derivatize that cannabinoid into ultimately over 100 different cannabinoids that occur in nature. So this is indeed our plan. We have a pipeline of other rarer cannabinoids that we will be bringing to market over the next year and years. We look forward to really helping this industry grow. Our mission as a business
is to bring cannabinoids into every household. We believe that this amazing class of ingredients can help so many people, and indeed animals and pets. And this is what we're here for, to help bring the benefits of these ingredients to every household on the planet.
Thanks, Roy, for answering that formulation question. Super useful. A lot of people were asking for that. Right, so a huge thank you to our panelists and to Creo for opening this window to an exciting future of health, wellness, and beauty with pure, more sustainable cannabinoids. Whether it's existing products and industries or the catalyst for new products and industries, the future of CBG and other cannabinoids shines bright. And fermentation is most certainly a cornerstone of all of this innovation. So if you want to be part of this revolution, please contact Creo and co-create a cleaner, healthier, and more sustainable world. Thanks so much.
Nature is a source of infinite creativity, and cannabinoids are one of its most amazing gifts. Today, thanks to one of nature's oldest processes, fermentation, Creo is unleashing the full potential of cannabinoids, transforming health, wellness, and nutrition, using technology that delivers innovation without doing undue harm to the planet. Join Creo in bringing cannabinoid-enabled products to every household. Nature loves our cannabinoids, and so will you.